Welcome to the third season of That's So Second Millennium, the Catholic Science podcast where we explore the fascinating borderlands between science and theology through realms of philosophy, human experience, and more.
Welcome back to That's So Second Millennium, episode 125. Still excited about that interview I got to do with Katie Prejean-McGrady that went live on April 30th. If you haven't had the chance to do that, definitely go out and check the Ave Explores podcast. So I was inspired by that because anytime that I'm mentioned in somewhat the same breath as Chris Baglow, that's a really good day for me because Chris Baglow does awesome stuff. And that got me thinking, you know, she interviewed Chris Baglow as a part of their, Katie Prejean-McGrady interviewed Chris Baglow as part of their Ave Explores series talking about the relationship between faith and science, which I was privileged to also appear as part of that series. And that got me thinking, hey, we've talked to Chris Baglow. So, yeah, I'm in a time of incredible transition right now that I'll get to tell you all about in a month or two. And Bill, I know, is just dealing with finals and the insanity of that at Holy Cross College in South Bend. So, yes, this is one more rerun episode, but it's a rerun episode with a purpose. Because Chris Baglow and Jay Martin, because Jay Martin, his co-conspirator, conspiring to do all sorts of wonderful things for helping Catholic schools in particular teach people better about faith and science, because faith and science are not locked in this eternal conflict. They are not opposites of each other. That's crap, and we need to stop believing that that's the case. The fewer the people in the world that believe that, the better, because in fact, it's completely false. That's what this episode is about. Their specific concrete efforts. Chris Baglow has written and put through a second edition a really cool textbook for high school students, who give a darn, which is not always to be taken for granted. But so he's put together a textbook. They do workshops. They have a really great outreach. So we got to talk to them back in 2019. This was actually, these two episodes were the finale of season 1 of that, so Second Millennium. And I hope that Morgan can do something with the audio to probably make it just a little bit better. And I think Bill can probably do something with the show notes to make those a little bit better. So we're going to dust these off and bring them back to you while we're cooking on other stuff in the background. Before I hang it up, I should mention that, yes, the Society of Catholic Scientists Conference is on for the first weekend in June. We're back this year. Well, hopefully we'll be back. Definitely cooking. Those are ideas that are cooking in the background as well. And hopefully we'll be able to bring you a lot more interesting stuff in June. So for the moment, just listen to the dulcet tones of Chris Baglow and Jay Martin, two great human beings talking about why faith and science are not opposites and in fact go beautifully together. See ya. We're very privileged here to be talking to Chris Baglow and Jay Martin of the Science and Religion Initiative of the McGrath Institute for Church Life here at the University of Notre Dame. So the McGrath Institute has a major initiative to bring to especially high school science teachers in Catholic schools across the country some sort of perspective, and how would you like to put that?
Yeah, so we work with teachers and help them engage in integrating their curriculums, their curricula in faith and science, in religion classes, and then also in science classes, to basically create a dialogue at each school that we serve between the two disciplines that the teachers are capable of leading.
Yes. Yeah. To be able to discuss that competently, and it's chiefly at the high school level.
Right. Exactly.
Although the earlier you can get it, the better, but one thing at a time.
Yes.
So, yeah. And of course that speaks to me a great deal, because that's been my own personal journey through faith, was that, I started out with the idea that science was on this track and religion was on this track. And never the twain shall meet, with the result, of course, that by the age of 14, I was a thoroughgoing atheist. That's addressing a key, I suspect is addressing a key need. I don't exactly have the statistics to back that up. But
we do, and you're right.
You do. Exactly. That's why we're having this interview right here and right now. So, So, and you've just gotten back from quite a while down in Louisiana, some strategically timed trip to Louisiana
to
do
Yeah, we were down there the first full week of January for the Gulf Coast Faith Formation Conference, which is a big event down there that serves a large region of dioceses in the Gulf South. And then after that, we put on an event there on overcoming the myth of conflict between faith and science.
Right.
And a similar themed conference was given at a high school in New Orleans, Holy Cross High School, which has been a great partner for us in terms of the work that we do in faith and science, a school that's really kind of taken the vision of the Science and Religion Initiative and run with it at their school. And they had also invited other schools there. So about 160 participants at the Gulf Coast Conference, and then 120 at the Holy Cross event.
And those were also chiefly from the Gulf and the southern regions.
Exactly, yes. Science and religion teachers. The whole faculty of Holy Cross actually participated in the second event.
Yeah. And of course, we sort of stereotypically think of people in the South as, sometimes coming in more on the religion without science side as opposed to the science without religion side.
Yeah. Not the Catholics.
Not the Catholics. right.
Not
so much. Yeah.
And the initiative also hosts during the summer more in-depth and longer-term introduction to these topics for teachers from around the country. Am I right?
Yeah. We have 3 seminars every summer. One here, one down in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And then the third one, which is a more advanced seminar for schools that have been through one of the 2 foundation programs called Capstone. So we have Foundations Notre Dame for a week, Foundations New Orleans, which lasts about the same, and then Capstone, which is shorter, about a half a week.
Okay. 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And so what do you do at each of these? Is there a difference between the Notre Dame and New Orleans ones? Is there and then what do you do that's different at the Capstone? What issues do you discuss?
You want to do Notre Dame?
So at Foundations Notre Dame, it is a sort of lecture-based kind of format where we bring in a handful of some of the best, most prominent researchers at top-tier universities, research universities, to talk about faith and science as it pertains to their own discipline. So we have a biologist, we have a physicist, we sometimes will have a chemist or an astronomer, philosophers, theologians, and we tend to spend about 2/3 of our time in the sort of lecture seminar question and answers. And there's a reading component that leads up to the Foundations Notre Dame seminar that prepares them for the material they'll get in the keynote. The remaining third is devoted to sort of implementation workshops where the teachers from the schools, each school applies with a track of 3 teachers, usually 2 science teachers. And one of the requirements to get their stipend, or their area, is to produce a integrated lesson plan, which we, over the last 2 years, have been archiving and building a sort of broad web platform to distribute these. And so we tend to be a more sort of humanities-focused event at Notre Dame, unlike Foundations New Orleans, which Chris designed 2 years ago.
And so Foundations New Orleans, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
We use many of the same texts. Each event has an 8-week online reading phase.
Okay.
That's
Prior
moderated by veterans who have kind of been at this for a while. That goes on for an 8-week period before the event.
Yeah.
Foundations New Orleans is so Foundations Notre Dame is lecture oriented. Foundations New Orleans is more lab and seminar discussion oriented.
Yeah.
So there are many Catholic schools now who are entering in their science programs the STEM movement.
Yeah.
Following the next generation science standards and that kind of thing. And so we wanted to have an event where some experience of being in the lab was involved. And so we have 3 science experiments that are part of the event, one in physics, one in chemistry, and one in biology. And these experiments were designed and chosen and designed so that they could actually be a platform for beginning to ask the big questions about the relationship between faith and science.
Yeah.
So that's what our event does. And then we also have some lectures in there too, but we also have a lot of discussion. So we meet and talk about the various texts that they read in advance and go from there.
One of the, Foundations Notre Dame has been more my bailiwick for the last few years. But one of the most impressive things about the New Orleans experience and the lab focus is the labs together with the discussions provide teachers of of different disciplines to have the sort of experience of coming to knowledge in the other field. So we have theologians who are doing different lab experiments and maybe for the first time in a number of years can have the experience of coming to knowledge. Like, this is what it means to gain scientific knowledge. And then in the seminar discussions where we're talking about theological or philosophical texts, the scientists, for maybe the first time in a number of years again, have this is what theological knowledge looks like when it's coming together. Right. And it's a powerful thing. I was really blown away the first time I went down to F&O to see this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a very potent combination there. And then, so what does the capstone?
So the capstone event is we choose a theme. For instance, the first one in 2017 was on quantum mechanics. Mysteries, Quantum and Divine. I think that was
with Steve Barr.
With Stephen Barr. Last year was on the new atheism with David Bentley Hart. And this summer we have a number of presenters who are coming to talk about human consciousness and reason as it relates to human origins and artificial intelligence. So we have, actually there's three things going on in the capstone. You've got the theme and the presenters on that. We invite administrators from these schools, and they have a special track which is about helping them learn how to intentionally bring faith and science into dialogue across their school's curriculum. And then also more, kind of best practices for the teachers who come. Some breakouts on how to, how to really do, bring this to bear in the classroom.
An improvement.
And Jake could add more.
Well, just Capstone was designed for basically a second step after Foundations. So the majority of our teachers, maybe 2/3, are teachers that have gone through either Foundations, Notre Dame, or New Orleans. We do have some schools that apply that already have very developed science and religion kind of integration at their schools, and we kind of shuttle them from the F&O or Foundations applications to Capstone. So we have it's a fascinating kind of dynamic because we have schools that are familiar with our programming or already have a degree of sophistication that would be sort of undermotivated at the Foundation seminars. So people hit the ground running in a way that we haven't really experienced yet. With our Foundations programming. So it's really fantastic. It's a very intimate kind of setting. We have discussion sessions that follow that kind of go into three tracks. We have as Chris mentioned, the administrative track. Then we have an integration track, which we have a curricular expert talk about how could you create curricula based on what we just heard in the lecture, and talk about strategies and ways to look at the sort of pedagogical process. But then we also have an academic track, which is for the more nerdy among us, myself included, who want to talk about the issues that were discussed in greater depth with the speaker. And that's been really wonderful. All three have been really successful.
That is a great. To sort of break that. Because you can, of course, my experience is probably a little extreme, but, being that sort of isolated person of faith, even in the context of being at a Catholic school, and not ever bridging that, letting some of the inside out and actually seeing, does this make sense? I'm worried about this, or I'm curious about this, and I've always wondered this myself. Does this make any sense to anyone else?
Is that a growing trend among Catholic schools to understand the value of teaching this kind of interdisciplinarity and synthesis?
Actually, recent data from the John Templeton Foundation, which funds our whole programming, shows that a significant number of schools, at least in the respondents that they've had for a recent study that Cara did, funded by Templeton, say that they're doing this. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help schools do it better. To do it with good information, good resources from leaders in their fields. From people like Brother Guy Consolmagno, who has been on your podcast before. Stephen Barr, the president of the Society of Catholic Scientists. Somebody like Dr. Dan Keebler at Franciscan University, who's the head of the biology department there and runs a lab there. Karen Uber from Harvard, who
also in the leadership of the Society of Catholic Scientists.
Exactly. So that we have, the scientists there to help them really groom their teaching. It's one thing to have the intention and even to make an attempt at integrating faith and science.
Yeah.
It's another way to do it well.
Yeah.
In a way that doesn't promote pseudoscience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or in a way, that isn't just sort of that kind of glosses over the questions and some of the sharp detail.
Yeah.
And careful reflection that needs to be given to them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, one thing that we found, in addition to just the expertise, and there's the sort of the content that they gain, but also there's a sort of reassurance that I'm here with a Harvard astrochemist who is an expert on planetary formation. Those are huge. But one of the most fascinating things, and really, frankly, encouraging, is how quickly a sense of camaraderie is built up at these schools with people who come, especially those who have come twice, and who in the second round come with their administrators.
Yeah.
By the time they leave, a lot of these schools have a vision of what they want to do. They have kind of assurances of the goodwill of their colleagues and administrators to do it. So the recent Institute Day we had at Holy Cross High School was really born out of their experience coming to Foundations and then coming to Capstone with their principal or president of the school.
Yes.
And they were champing at the bit to get going, and they did it. I mean, it was an amazing event last month, and just remarkable things are happening at the schools who are bold enough to really work hard at doing this well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, to kind of wrap around, these more wide impact events that we have called Institute Days grow naturally out of these summer seminars. Yeah. Teachers come and they invariably say, I wish my colleagues had been here to hear this.
Right.
I wish they had a chance to share this. Yeah. And they often then will ask us to come. Yeah. And so we'll come with a team and spend a day with their faculty. Yeah. And, and just give them a general understanding. Yeah. Talks like Catholicism and Evolution by Stephen Barr. Yeah. And I do one on science and the Bible. Yeah. Corey Hayes from St. Joseph Seminary College down in Louisiana does one on Galileo. Yeah. And just so let's make sure everybody on the faculty is able to get good information about this. That's, that's broad enough that the major questions are addressed. Yeah.
Now, Chris is not going to mention this, but before he began working for the SRI, he wrote a textbook. Oh, yeah. Really the first textbook on science and religion for Catholic high schools. Yeah. It came at an unfortunate time in which the bishop's curriculum for high schools was being solidified and did not include this component. But one of the things that's so impressive about the textbook, and we've seen schools use it. Yeah. Some of the schools that we've worked with have it as a regular textbook for an elective course. Yeah. Courses that use it are developed at our seminars. It's a sort of concrete example that this has already been done as a sort of foundation. Yeah. And part of our recent grant term, Chris wrote a second edition, and that's with the editors at the press now. We're developing an ebook, and then we're going to be developing additional institute days that focus on how to use, if a school were to develop a course around the textbook, how they could do it effectively. Right. So we have I think a critical mass of resources, of relationships with schools and teachers and administrators, and also adjacent societies, Society of Catholic Scientists, Lumen Christian Institute at the University of Chicago, Catholic University of America, who really are interested in this kind of educational movement, and we have the resources, and we're continuing to develop them to make this easier. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's still early days yet. Hopefully, I mean.
Yeah. So it seemed. One thing that I've noticed, so when I wrote the textbook, right, I actually did it. It's a long story, but I did it as a request from a Catholic high school, McGill Children Catholic High School in Mobile, Alabama, as a curriculum for them. Yeah. And in the proposal, I asked for permission if I could seek publication, which Midwest Theological Forum published it in 2009. Yeah. But at the time, I really felt like I had created maybe a boutique item for that small percentage of blue ribbon Catholic schools that have decided we are going to stake the future of our school's excellence on the best science curriculum we can produce. Yeah. And we'd like to have something in religion that answers to that.
Complements that.
However, over the past 10 years since the book was published, more and more schools are moving precisely in the direction that McGill-Tulane was trying to move in back in 2005 when they first asked me to do it. So the relevance of the topic is becoming more and more, clear, more obvious to Catholic educators, and to the bishops as well. In November, I went to the USCCB, U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops meeting at the request of Bishop Robert Barron and his Committee on Catechesis and Evangelization to talk about faith and science and the disaffiliated young Catholics, those who are no longer practicing their faith, and a large majority of whom cite the conflict between science and religion as the reason they don't. So there seems to be, to answer your question, Bill, there seems to be a burgeoning sort of movement in that direction. And the demand for our programming has kind of given anecdotal evidence of that. There's a lot of more people sort of looking for this kind of thing. I ran 3 years of a Templeton-funded seminar on faith and science from 2011 to 2013, sponsored by Templeton and McGill-Tulane. And it took me, I can't tell you how many hours it took me just to recruit enough schools to actually have the event. Now, I mean, every year more than double the amount of schools we can actually host for our summer seminars apply. We have to turn away and it's kind of sad, but so many schools just because we just don't have space.
Well, and that begs for either just turning over the Dad Blaine football stadium to it, or for universities across the country to start picking this up and expanding that to be, because that's interesting. I have always wondered about that statistic about, the idea that so many students cite, or so many young former Catholic cite this idea that that there's the conflict between science and religion. And I always wonder how many of them have even thought about it that deeply, and how often it's sort of that's what they say, and it's actually a proxy for something else. In my own life, I have my own kind of struggle between just a sort of existential despair, which sort of part and parcel of the modern world in any case, and maybe the human condition in general. It was just too much hope. It was too much to hope for, and that somehow this Bible track and this science track could somehow it was that there's a fundamental sense that there's, and so I almost see what you're doing as in a way sort of at the service of the virtue of hope in terms of. In fact, there might actually be an answer.
No more profound compliment could be given.
Well, just to make that a little more concrete. That's a very prominent feature of our feedback is teachers who come from schools saying, "I thought I was the only one, and I'm not." And I'm, and especially teachers who come from schools where they don't have a lot of support structure. But even schools will say, "We thought we were the only ones doing this. We thought we were the only ones who didn't buy that science and religion have nothing to do with each other." Or, it's a fascinating thing. And I think, with respect to hope, a lot of teachers leave here not just eager to teach in integrated ways about science and religion, but to teach in general that they can do something that they only maybe hoped they could do, or thought was notionally possible before. Of course, why I wanted to name the podcast "That's So Second Millennium" to sort of take a wide, maybe Ratzingerian sweep across history is that I think the second millennium almost. I think one strand of it is that there was the institutional church, and it became a hypocritical church in a broad sense, being welded to the political state. And the wealth and privilege that come with that. And then the last 500 years, the second half of the second millennium, has really been about the sort of reaction of, the Protestant Reformation, angry at that. But of course, the Protestant church has become so embedded in the state as well that there's then the movement toward, on the one hand, ever more splintering Protestant denominations, and on the other hand, simply toward, what we now call progressivism. It's gone by however many names at this point, the Enlightenment and liberalism and progressivism. But some of this, so much of that is
it's trying to be more Christian than Christian. It's almost, and I think there is that sort of psychological impulse deep below, this sort of more surface issue. I mean, have you read Lawrence Krauss's A Universe from Nothing? You ever attempted to read that book?
I've had at least a novice's introduction to it.
Yeah. I read that book a number of years back, and it was one of the things that I came away from the book, first of all, wishing that I picked up this book because I wanted to learn some physics, and you did not spend nearly enough of this book teaching me physics. Second of all, my God, what has that man's life been like? Because he does not want God to exist. He practically screams it from certain pages.
Okay, so this is wild speculation, and I'm happy to be told I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But my experience is that many people who think that way, who wish God doesn't want to exist, if you ask them who God is, or what God do you wish does not exist,
right,
and they gave you a definition, you would agree with them. You would not want, no, please, I sure hope that if that's what God is, that God doesn't exist too.
I hope there's not an angry white man in a chair sitting on a cloud somewhere, throwing, hellfire and damnation at people. Yeah, I hope not.
When I talked to the bishops about this, I was asked by Bishop Barron if I would share 5 questions that people ask the most about faith and science.
Yeah.
And instead, I decided to share the questions that they never ask.
Right.
But I wish that they would.
Yes.
Because it seems to me that part of our responsibility here, and I'm talking about not just the Science and Religion Initiative, I'm talking about Catholics today, is to instigate better questions about God and meaning.
Yes.
Because people are asking the wrong kind of questions.
Right. Yeah. And they're attacking a straw dog version of, that 700 years ago no one believed it.
That's right, exactly.
Just like, was it Father Ehrman yesterday who was talking about, no one in the 15th century thought the world was flat. No one.
Yeah, right. But even deeper than that.
Yeah.
So nobody ever asked, what do you mean when you say God creates everything?
Right.
God's the creator of the universe.
Yeah.
Do you mean that God is some kind of like mechanic in the sky, like an all-powerful engineer, or an all-powerful micromanager of complex processes in the universe?
Right.
If that's what you mean, then the Christian tradition is unanimous rather, in rejecting such an idea. As soon as I can say what it is, I'm not talking about God anymore. As soon as I can comprehend it, as soon as I can come out and say, then I'm completely off the mark.
I think this brings up one of the real virtues of how our speakers, and this is, I think, one of the chief virtues of Chris's textbook, and now as he's transitioned to be our director, which is really permeates our programming, is an insistence on sort of epistemic humility.
Yeah.
Is we want to tell people, give them ways to think about these questions. We don't want to give a definitive version that they go home and recite and have their students recite, and their students recite to their friends and their parents and their families, whatever. What we want to do is to say, look, is begin with I think a fundamental, what feels like a concession, but it shouldn't be. This is hard. It's hard to read Scripture and figure out what it has to do with what we know scientifically. And what Chris's book models, and our speakers, especially Stephen Barr, and all of them really, is that whatever the science and religion dialogue is, it's not about the creation of a sort of authoritarian or even an official sort of discourse. What we're really talking about is showing people, if you know what Scripture even says about itself, and what the Catholic tradition especially says about what Scripture is, then you can think more clearly through what it has to say about the created world and its status and its relationship to God and the relationship between human beings. But it begins with a sort of baseline commitment to epistemic humility that anyone who's going to succeed in the dialogue has to practice. And we hope to model that.
Being willing to say, I don't know.
Yeah, which is crucial to being a scientist.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
ironically enough.
Yeah. You were mentioning the science in the Bible.
Yeah.
The science in the Bible tracks would seem to run parallel, like in geometry.
Yeah.
Two parallel lines
the
that
twain
never
shall
meet.
Yeah.
That brings me to another question I share with the bishops that I never get asked.
Yeah.
When did science and religion enter into conflict?
Right.
Everybody assumes they've always been in conflict.
Right.
They assume that somehow intrinsic to their definition is some kind of conflict.
Yeah.
They don't realize that this is the product of late 19th century American anti-Catholicism in one
Among other
case.
things, yeah. But
or also political maneuvering to justify secular education.
Yeah.
So, those kinds of things, and we get to address those with teachers.
Yeah.
It's very, very, the joy of discovery that's involved for the teachers when they read the text that we talk with, or when they get to hear from our presenters, is fantastic. It's very exciting. It's like when I brought my two youngest children to Disney World for the first time.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I saw my daughter's face when she saw Cinderella's castle.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, maybe not as exciting and magical as that, but just as exciting, maybe not as magical.
Because we're old jaded adults, so we don't let it so much of a show on the outside sometimes.
But to instigate a sense of wonder about these things.
Yeah.
Routinely, teachers will, like when we do institute days for professional development, they'll thank us for treating them like adults.
Well, then there's that.
You know what I mean? For giving them a chance to hear and to be part of a dialogue that's significant, that's important, that touches their disciplines, but also their lives.
Yeah, because ultimately it does.
Yeah.
And it prepares them for a good university experience along the lines that universities were designed for from the very beginning, right? To kind of inculcate that sense of wonder that all of these fields of information somehow fit together.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Exactly.
And historically speaking, I mean, that's the other side, because of course That's So Second Millennium is a deliberately ambiguous title. But another side of it is the positive side, like what was almost the first task that universities accomplished was this integration of, Orthodox Catholic Christianity and Aristotelianism.
Right.
So there is a way to do both of these at the same time that's logically consistent. And, and of course Thomas Aquinas, I remember reading a little bit of Aquinas in high school and just being blown away of just how careful he is to bring the very best versions of other people's arguments into his discourse and then answer them and do his absolute best to harmonize them.
Well, and I think what's so instructive, in addition to Aquinas, is the confidence he brings. He brings the full confidence in the faith and its sort of explanatory power to the very best of, secular philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it really seems to entertain the possibility that something will be raised by Aristotle or by the Arabic philosophers that Christianity can't account for. And it's that sort of confidence, it's a humble optimism.
Right. It's not his doing that's going to happen.
He doesn't possess it. It's something that he has kind of constituted himself in a certain way.
Yeah.
And that's something that we hope to kind of instill. Like you should have confidence in the faith it may be hard, but you have the Christianity is not going to be surprised by the findings of some evolutionary conclusion.
Right.
But in fact, we should be excited about whatever we discover in the sciences.
Right. Yeah. And that it's fascinating in some sense. I mean, to take evolution for example. I mean, is there a more interesting way of unpacking a line of scripture than that line in Genesis 2 about and he sculpted a man out of mud.
Right.
Which I mean, pretty early on, I kind of scratched my head. So you're angry about saying that we descended from apes,
right?
Yeah.
Because you prefer the description where we were created directly out of mud,
right?
Yeah, in fact,
and this is just a really interesting. We've actually gotten to learn some of the details about how that sculpting process happened.
Yeah. Actually, Blessed John Henry Newman was on that, as we say. I'm from Louisiana,
right?
He was on that like white on rice. That's a Louisiana thing. Because he was.
I had no idea.
He actually lived
on that. Yeah.
I mean,
he lived through that era. Yeah,
he produced. One of the greatest works of modern Catholic theology, the Essay on Development of Christian Doctrine, which perceives something like evolution happening within our understanding of the faith, of progressing and specifying a higher complexity. It was 13 or 14 years before Darwin produced The Origin of Species.
There's that, yeah.
And what he did, he was asked by a free church, is it free kirk or free church, Jay?
I don't know.
Free church minister, by a letter that he received.
Yeah.
If we could accept what Darwin was saying about it. And he says, this idea of human beings coming from the limus in Latin, the mud. Yeah. He says, well, it just probably took millions rather than moments.
Right.
Millions of years rather than moments.
Right.
Already he had the same kind of sort of understanding.
That's not that huge challenge to
Right.
Does the other trend that's going on in modern society, relativism, make it harder or easier for schools to kind of try for this synthesis?
That's not something that we really encounter so much, mainly because, especially on a cultural level, relativism seems to be, you could say it's a self-serving moral practice. Yeah. They don't, very, very few high school students are going to have anything like a metaphysical kind of anti-realism in which,
right.
Yeah. But if you start telling them that what they're doing is wrong, or what their people that they're friends with are doing is wrong, then they'll say, well, it's wrong for you. And so what we tend to see is actually kind of a hyper-rationalism with respect to our teachers. They want to say, okay, this is great, and it's very edifying to talk about God's loving intent in creating human beings. But I want to know, what are the facts? And so there's a hyper-rationalism that makes a sort of procedural cut along, across the range of facts, as if God creating human beings in love is not a fact, and human beings having a common ancestor with apes is a different. It's a fact. It's a fact.
Yeah, right.
But there's a sort of epistemic superiority.
Absolutely.
But
and it's procedural.
But interesting. The interesting thing in terms of relativism. And, this idea that, there is no such thing as absolute truth or any of those kinds of ideas. The fact that one place where most people, even people who claim to be relativists in some fashion or other, remain realists, is in their acceptance of science.
Right.
Science does put you in touch with the truth. Science does show you facts. It's interesting that by bringing faith and science into dialogue, they can begin to see that there are truths of faith. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That can be seen in light of science, and by bringing those two together, opens their minds to the possibility. Yeah. Look, water really is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom and 1 molecule. Yeah. And maybe God really is 1 and 3. Right. Not that those two truths are necessarily directly related, but the point is that to begin to see that because theology can be robust and responsive in a respectful way to science. Yeah. Maybe theology has something to tell us too. Yeah. And that's and I think that's one way in which relativism, it's like kicking in the back door of relativism.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you go and give your class a module on why relativism is wrong. And they might shut their minds from the beginning. You're going to talk about evolution and creation and why they're different and why they're complementary. Yeah. You're eroding the relativistic idea kind of, in a less direct but more effective way.
It reminds me of the phrase, the truth shall set you free. If you can accept the truth can exist somewhere, then you're suddenly free to accept the truth can exist elsewhere.
Precisely. Precisely.
Yeah. And truth is restless. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about doing the work that we do. You can start to establish a set of truths, and by sort of truth's nature, it always is expanding. There's always more truth to be known. Yeah. And it connects itself to other things, and before you know it, you believe a whole heck of a lot of things. Right. And you take them to be true.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, and I think sometimes it's overstated. I think it can be overstated that sometimes lines are drawn. Like I remember reading a book by de Lubac. What is it? I forget which one. The title probably may come to you, but I mean, he mentions more in passing. It's not. I don't think
What's
the actual. About? It's like Nature and Grace. I think that's the book. Right. And he mentions, I think, a number of places in passing some things that really sort of, I read them and I looked at them and I said, I don't know that I believe. You know exactly where the boundary between theology and science is. Mm-hmm. And there are, so for example, one thing that works, it works in Aquinian theology, should work in philosophy, It certainly works in science, is if you find an internal contradiction in your theory. In some sense, my theory can explain observations, but if I've got an internal contradiction, who's going to accept it? No one's going to accept my theory about how the asteroid Vesta formed if there's a logical contradiction in it.
Right.
And that will work the same way, that should work in a good theologic argument or discussion just as well.
We had a question at the Gulf Coast Conference about similar questions. And one of the kind of most compelling strategies is to ask the questions of self-reference. Okay, so a statement like, there's no such thing as absolute truth. Well,
yes.
How does that how are we expected to take that statement as being absolutely true or not?
Right.
At that point,
a classic.
Right, you're sort of an infinite regress very quickly.
Yeah. You've annihilated yourself immediately upon contact. Maybe there's no such thing as absolute truth. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Then what?
Right. And then what are you even saying?
Then what am I? I'm sorry. I consume that much oxygen. I'm just sorry. Yeah.
In the schools where you've seen this working so far, does it even tend to affect not just the science teachers and the religion teachers, but is there suddenly some kind of openness to the truth anew that it gets the mathematics teachers and the sociology teachers and everything else to getting together more, perhaps on a common syllabus kind of approach?
Well, I think, one of the things just from our recent trip to Holy Cross High School was some of I think it was a sociology teacher, wanted to know, okay, this is great. We have you've given us an idea of what integration looks like with science, the natural sciences and religion, but what about the social sciences?
Right.
So I think for teachers who aren't directly, employed to promote the science and religion dialogue, we show that integrated curriculum is possible. And they wanted to know, okay, let's talk about other things. How do we do this in our own fields? How do we do this with psychology, sociology, economics, whatever it might be?
Yeah.
And it's proof that this is possible. There's no reason to think that a successfully integrated science and religion curriculum is limited only to science and religion. There's nothing inherently structural about science and religion that allows integration these other disciplines don't. So we give teachers who aren't in the field a chance to say, this is, analogically, this is what it looks like. You can do it too, and let's talk about that when we have a chance.
And there's a famous document from the Sacred Congregation for Catholic Education. So this is the church's congregation that deals with issues of Catholic education.
Yeah.
And this was the first document that was produced, I think, by the congregation after Vatican II. It was in 1977.
Okay.
And it's called The Catholic School.
Okay.
And there's a quote in there that says that the task of a Catholic school is to create a synthesis of faith and culture, reached by integrating all of human knowledge through the subjects taught in the light of the gospel. So what we're doing in faith and science is really just one place.
Yeah, and it's arguably the hardest place.
Yeah. For instance, I would love to see, if I could add one thing to all of this, right away, the first thing I would say would be faith and literature. Faith in the arts in general.
Okay.
Because I honestly think that an engagement of a person's imagination is even more potent in some ways, right, than simply teaching them theological doctrine.
Yeah.
If you're engaging if you're helping instill in them a Catholic imagination, then, being able to see literature through a Catholic lens and that kind of thing, you're giving them a vision of the world that they won't easily throw away.
Yeah.
That'll be something that remains with them and that they'll actually cherish about their own education. Yeah. So there's an area. But psychology, sociology, we get a lot of mathematics teachers who come and participate in our events, and they'll generally get a lot from what we do in physics.
Yeah.
And some of the mathematical issues in physics and that kind of thing. We'll get some benefit there. But it would be great to see it. And history would be the next.
Yes. Oh, in fact.
Literature and, integration in literature and faith, in theology, integration of history and theology. These are these are ripe for the picking and need to begin happening.
Yeah. And sort of a broader understanding, a much broader understanding of, that Catholicism is not just about rules. I mean, we have dogmas. We do. Yeah. We do have a certain number of dogmas. I don't think really, if you were to sit them all, not the catechism, because God bless the bishops who wrote the catechism, but they got a little wordy. I think there is room for, the magisterium to turn to an idea of what is a solid, but, close to the minimum reducible logical content of, okay, these are the things that have been bequeathed to us by revelation,
Right.
There's not a huge number of things, and to do a little bit of attempt to sort out tradition with a large T from tradition with a small T, because, we don't, and as among other things, an aid to sort of separating our identity as Catholics from our identity with whatever branch of the political spectrum we might be on.
Right.
Which is, another side of, the whole dialogue, history, what's politics, but sort of the froth at the surface of history, right. In a sense. That's where we're at right now, but it's all due to that. Yeah. But that is a beautiful idea that's, and again, I think almost doing religion, being able to bridge the faith and physical science is almost, we did the hardest one. Mm-hmm. Let's go back and do, in some ways it's the hardest, but in some ways there's just so much more to do, I guess, with the social sciences and history or literature. I hadn't even thought about that until you mentioned it, but of course that's right. Of course that's right. And of course, what did being itself do when it emptied itself and became man? It told a lot of stories.
There you go.
That's right.
So to speak. Yeah.
Do you find a challenge from the principals? Because not only because of all of the challenges we've talked about already, but there's just something about the nature of a high school that's intrinsically silo-driven. Teachers tend to think of themselves as kind of the lords and ladies of their classroom, and that some kind of imposition of a broader syllabus might endanger their knowledge and skills as a teacher. Or am I being very stereotypical there?
No, we have had, a very, very small kind of territorial kind of response. But, we're talking about maybe a handful of people that come to our seminars. What we typically find, at least as people have come through our foundation seminars, is the real issue are sort of ideological differences within the broader departments who aren't represented at the conferences. So we've had several teachers who teach religion, and their colleagues are more or less, young earth creationists who challenge the prospects of her salvation for thinking that, we can actually talk about evolutionary theory or something like that. So we don't, the territorial thing doesn't really affect us, so we don't see it very much. With administrators or teachers. I think the real challenge that we deal with in terms of bringing out implementation, vision, and strategy is the fact that teachers are woefully overworked and underpaid. And they're asked to do an incredible amount of stuff that distracts them from what it is they probably signed up for.
And administrators have a gigantic weight on their shoulders. First of all, they have to see to it that their teachers are meeting state and federal standards and those kinds of things. One of the things we try to emphasize in our implementation workshops is that integration of faith and science can happen in such a way that it doesn't have to have sort of a kind of invasive or blank check kind of space in the curriculum. That there are places where it comes up naturally. You can think about, for instance, in standard theological education as envisioned by the USCCB. When you talk about the Old Testament, you talk about Genesis. It's a good place to talk about the relationship between faith and science. When you're dealing with the Big Bang in the science classroom, it's a great place to distinguish between what we mean by the Big Bang and what we mean by the Catholic doctrine of creation and why they're not in conflict. There are various places where this can be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of finding those places and knowing how to best make this distinction. And I often argue that making those kinds of distinctions and relations are actually conducive to excellent science curricula and excellent religion curricula.
Yeah.
Because you come to understand your discipline better when you're able to distinguish it from and relate it to another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We answer these
and the elements within it as well.
This goes back to the humility that Jay talks about with, which we're so blessed to have these incredible presenters who come who all share that common trait.
Yeah.
They know.
Mm-hmm.
This is where, what I mean? You don't hear the theologian in one of our panel discussions stepping up and saying, "Excuse me, Steve Barr, particle physicist, please be quiet for a second while I tell you what I think about particle physics."
Right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We're all listening. When Steve's talking about particle physics, we're all listening.
Right. Yeah.
We also then can conjecture with one another. Is this what the church means about this? Or is this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you talk about quantum mechanics, is this what this means? Or that?
Yeah.
That kind of respectful dialogue is something we want to model for teachers. They can go back to their school and do it.
Right.
And don't tell them I said this because it might work against the humility that they have, but why we insist on having
I can excise this part.
the very best speakers, the very best researchers in the field who can speak to the science and religion dialogue. I just think about because it's at that level you have kind of watershed distinctions that are introduced. One quick example is when John Cavini, who's a patristic scholar, a remarkable Catholic theologian at Notre Dame, gave an entire kind of keynote on the idea that the doctrine of creation is a revealed doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, because we have no idea what creation means in a theological sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that had to be revealed to us.
Yeah.
It's manifestly different than the findings of natural philosophy, that the universe is something that came into existence in some way.
Mm-hmm.
The doctrine of creation is, as revealed, kind of marks a theological index that we would not have otherwise. And once that was in place and people understood what we're doing, this is not an ersatz explanation.
Mm-hmm.
This is a sophisticated understanding, kind of a texturizing of the world in which we live.
Yeah.
And its origins. And so it's distinctions like that, which when you have some of the best minds in the world on a particular field, telling teachers what they think is important, what's critical to teach this well, magnificent things happen. Mm-hmm. And it's just little distinctions that happen like that. And I learn a ton every year just being around these people.
Yeah.
And the teachers, seem to do too. But so you start telescoping out, generations, and you think, okay, we have a crop of students now who in high school are learning something that I didn't learn until graduate school.
Yeah.
That the doctrine of creation is a revealed doctrine that has import on these particular points.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how cultures are changed.
I'm fascinated by your discussion. It's in the New Orleans foundations where you go and you do some lab work as a part of the, of course, again, thinking of Father Ehrman, but of course also being a geologist, whether hopefully in the days to, in years to come, as this branches out and hopefully gets taken up by more people, whether there might be room for an outdoor, a lab, a descriptive science sort of, maybe geology and ecology sort of.
Definitely, but not in June in New Orleans.
Not in New Orleans, no. You want to stay in that air conditioning.
That's right. We're going to have to find some
July in Wyoming. That's a great time.
Something up in Yosemite or something.
Yosemite.
That Father Terry brings to the table. Just he gave a presentation last year at Foundations Notre Dame. Basically, that starts with kind of understanding water systems, water basins, river systems, and was able to draw out of that an incredible amount of theological content, scientific content. It was remarkable. But you're right.
Yeah.
We don't do sort of environmental ethical stuff, but talking about ecology as sort of ecological systems has been incredibly interesting and very fruitful for ways of getting at the science and religion question that our participants and program instructors may not have anticipated.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you said your book is the second volume of your book is coming out soon.
Edition.
Yeah. So my last year of my last academic year, 2017, 2018, before I moved here in July, I was on sabbatical from Notre Dame Seminary in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Writing the second edition of the textbook.
Okay.
the textbook actually was part of my, what we call in Louisiana, my Katrina experience.
Okay.
I was invited to propose the curriculum about 6 days after our home was flooded and while we were evacuated to central Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I was the chair of the theology department at a college in New Orleans, Our Lady of Holy Cross College, now the University of Holy Cross.
Yeah.
And didn't think I'd have any time. To work on this. Right. I would not have thought I would have any time.
Isn't that something?
And certainly did not feel qualified to do it. But at this particular point, I was wondering even if the college would open again.
Right.
So I said yes.
Yes.
And so the first edition is really representative of the research that I did from 2005 to 2007.
Yeah.
Which was my first foray into the relationship between the Catholic faith and science.
Mm-hmm.
And I attempted to make a kind of an A to Z sort of approach.
Yeah.
I follow the same kind of format here. And now I have the benefit of an additional 12, 13 years of learning and speaking and engaging the topic and doing more research.
Yeah. And
so I'm excited about
people, Father Stephen Barr, whoever.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm excited. Well, Stephen Barr actually wrote the foreword to the first edition. Mm-hmm. And he keeps reminding me, he goes, I haven't read the second edition yet.
Right.
So I hope you didn't mess it up. You did okay with the first one.
And I can picture him saying that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, right. So, but Steve actually, one of his book, Modern Physics and Ancient Faith, was one of the first books I read.
Yeah.
And and by the end of it, I had read many, many more.
Yeah.
And still remained at the top.
One of the best, yeah.
One of, if not the best.
Yeah.
And so the reason I became friends with Steve Barr is because I at the end of writing my first draft, I called him.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm this guy, I'm a guy that teaches in New Orleans and I've written this textbook on faith and science for high school. And I had an idea of maybe about 35 pages of the 200-page manuscript that I wanted him to read.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I didn't mess up the science.
Right.
Misunderstand the science.
Yeah.
And Steve was so gracious, he actually said, this is a great idea.
Yeah.
And he read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Then we began collaborating together on education for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so there's a little, I hope I answered your question.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I'm excited about seeing, something that I feel, has a little bit more depth to it than the first edition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dramatic story of the manner in which God had the call delivered to you.
Yes, I would not be living in the frozen tundra now.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway,
there's
but it was definitely a great moment,
mm-hmm.
and a great turning point in my own life. Although at the time I just simply thought it would be a one-off project that I would do to help the school.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how those things work out.
Yeah, some of them do.
Yeah.
And sometimes the thing you think is going to be a big splash ends up being that boutique item that,
Right. Exactly.
Life is like that. So, yeah. I feel like there's several more podcasts worth of material we can discuss.
Right. Yeah.
But
this has been good. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. This is a great conversation.
Tremendous conversation. So.
Thanks for listening to this episode of That's So Second Millennium. TSSM's audio producer is Morgan Burkhardt. Our theme music, Igneous Grok, was composed and performed by Vin Marquardt. For my co-host Bill Schmidt, I'm Paul Giesting. Until next time.